and then let me know and I'm ready to go. Okay, perfect. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm really glad that you're all here and the number of participants keeps rising, which is amazing. I'm here to share a little bit more about my experience and how you can use your global experience and or mindset to land a job. So without further ado, a little bit more about me. I've lived and worked all around the world, so that's including all continents unless you're counting Antarctica. So still waiting for an invitation from them. I speak 3 languages well, and I'm working on another set of 3 languages. And that's all just to say that I definitely understand what it's like being an expat, being an immigrant. So I definitely know what it's like to be in your shoes, and I'm happy to share my experiences, both good and bad, on how to help use that experience to land a job. Also, I'm passionate about building great experiences that make people's lives easier. And as you can tell from my background, if you look me up on LinkedIn, I have over 10 years of experience, especially in the digital marketing space, and both for startups and for large organizations. And I'll share a little bit more about my background and what I've learned for the job hunt, and I hope this helps you out. So without further ado, I'll also mention some logistics. So the chat, which is there for you to ask any questions throughout this time, is really helpful because essentially you'll be able to ask questions and then I'll have the ability to get to the Q&A at the very end. So please use that chat box to come up with questions as the time comes, and I want to make this as interactive as possible. Another thing that people always ask is, can I get these slides? And yes, you can. So at the end, I will share with you where you can connect with me so I can right away send you these slides. So though you should take notes, also feel free to be in the moment while we're doing this. And as a lot of people who know me know, I'm a big proponent of mindfulness. So if you will humor me, we will do a quick exercise together, which is taking 3 breaths, 1 to let go of the past, 1 to let go of our planning, and 1 to really center ourselves here. So the first breath, let's all inhale together and exhale. So I know it's probably a really busy morning and or afternoon, depending where you are in the States and beyond. And I know, it's probably been a frenzy to get here on time. And I just wanted to, with this breath, that you let that all go. And then let's take a second inhale and exhale. And this is just, I know also that you're all really busy, as am I. So let's just forget for now what is for lunch later, or what is our plan for the next meeting, and to take the final and third breath for this exercise in and out. That's just to center ourselves. You took the time, you're already here. Again, the number of participants keeps rising. You're already here, so you've taken the time to be here and to learn more about what it's like to be a global professional. So I just challenge you to be as engaged as possible and to take this time to really connect with others and to connect with me as well. So that's just a little bit to kick us off in the right way, which I always try to do. So I also always try to have an agenda, of course, so we can plan our time together wisely. So we will be together for an hour. I'll try to spend about 30 to 40 minutes on the content, and I'll reserve almost half of the hour for Q&A. So again, feel free to put any questions you have into the chat box, and I'm happy to address them. Also, if you have any issues hearing me or seeing the slides or anything, feel free to message Nina and she will let me know. So without further ado, a little bit more about me. So I know some of you have had the chance to look at the event in advance, and even for those who haven't, I'm happy to share a little bit as well. So some people ask, what makes you qualified to speak about global experience? And I was born in one continent, moved to the next, studied on a third, and lived and worked abroad on the others. So I hope that qualifies me to be the one speaking to you today. I have my Bachelor's of Science degree from the University of Ottawa in Canada, where I'm from, with a minor in Global Studies. I also went to business school. I did so in St. Gallen in Switzerland. And most recently, a few years ago, I completed a startup bootcamp in San Francisco, which is where I'm speaking to you all from now in my SF office. So that's a little bit more about my education. So you can see I've written both a bachelor and master's thesis, and I'm really more earning a PhD in the School of Life. So I would mention this point again later, but to definitely use your education both from traditional sources as well as unconventional sources. So you're all global professionals in some capacity, and realize that sometimes the biggest education is actually moving abroad or re-expatriating home, and just use that as an asset. I'm a strong proponent of resilience, which is using what you may find to be issues or problems as assets and strengths. And I really think that all of you on the call today and all of you who see this recording afterwards should see your global mindset and experience as an asset and not to see it as a hindrance. So a little bit more about my work background. I worked initially in academia and then later in government and really large governments. So I started off in Australia. I then came to work back home in Canada, and then in Japan as well. I then made a shift in 2009 from the public sector to large organizations. So when I say large organizations, it's like the Fortune 1000. So that's hundreds of thousands of employees across the world. So it's quite a big shift. And you'll notice that in that time, I moved from Japan back home to Canada. And this is something that I would suggest to you as well. If you're changing multiple things about your application, realize that it's going to be a little more challenging if you're making multiple shifts at one time. So essentially, if for my example, if I was moving from government of Japan and I wanted to move to the States right away, that would be 2 shifts, right? Because it would be shift of country, and then I wanted to shift to a different vertical. So that's 2 changes. It's definitely not impossible. You just have to realize it will take longer. So one thing you'll notice about my employment history is I kept moving back home to Canada whenever I was making big career transitions. And this just means that you have to be patient if you're making more than 2 changes at a time. After 2013, I again moved back to Canada, and from a Fortune 1000 company, I actually moved to a very small, like 50% fund, which invested in a lot of startups in the hardware and clean tech space in Canada. And that was great. That's essentially where I caught the entrepreneurial bug, like they say. And that's when I decided to start my own company and actually exited from that with a co-founder who was my childhood friend, and we both had a great experience. So I thought, why not move to San Francisco and work for a startup here? So that's what I did, and I started in early 2016 running a marketing team at a health tech startup here in San Francisco, and then also did consulting more recently in the last couple of years, both in Mexico and here where I'm based now. So that just gives you a little bit more background of where I'm coming from, but also note that I made several shifts, which I'm happy to discuss if it's of interest to you in the Q&A, like what it's like to shift from public sector to private or vice versa. So I'm happy to talk about that later if it's of interest. So now let's talk about some general tips. So there's a reason why in English we call it job hunting. It is really like a hunt, and the job search does feel like a game at times, and it's a numbers game. So in order to win, and in this case, winning means landing a job that you like, there are a few key factors that I would hope that we all agree need to be in place. So you have to know yourself. It's not my job or anyone else's to tell you whether you would do well in a large company, in a small one, or in a mid-market company. You should really make that decision yourself, and it's fine that if that changes. You know, in the 12 years I've been working, that has changed several times, but you just need to get crystal clear on what you want at this point in your life. Another thing is to know the business and the market that you're entering. So that's really important because it essentially means that you are informed when you're going into the application process. So that is something that I would hope that everyone is doing as well. You ideally have the right timing, and that just means, when you start the recruitment process and you're getting into the funnel, of course, there are people who have applied before you, there are people who apply after you, and sometimes you can't control the timing, but sometimes people who apply to the job right away may get an offer sooner, and even sometimes those who got in later, you'll have to wait for them to complete the process before you get an offer. So just realize that there is some level of luck and timing as well. And you should really connect with people, both at the company, and that's ideal, but also like beyond that, if you see someone who you're really interested by their career, feel free to reach out to them and ask for an informational interview and find out more about them. I would just caution you with a dating analogy here. So I think sometimes people reach out to me and via LinkedIn or Twitter or something, and they're like, Lida, I want any job and I would love to pick your brain. I think that's such a turnoff for both me and probably yourself as well, if anyone came to you with such a broad ask and also like didn't have a specific reason why they wanted to meet with you. So if you think of it as dating, when people go on a first date, no one is proposing marriage to the other. And so you should also not think that it's normal, to meet a recruiter or hiring manager and right away ask them for a job. I mean, it's really great to be direct and say, I'm new in San Francisco or wherever else you're based, and I would love to learn more. Would you have time for me to treat you to a tea or coffee and speak more about your team? I'd love to know about your challenges. Something like that is totally great, but the very broad, like, I want any job and let me pick your brain, and there's like nothing in it for the other person, is something that would never happen in any other scenario in life. So especially in dating. So I say, always use a little bit of judgment of like what it would be like to be in the other person's shoes. So that all said, let's have the job search begin. But there is a little bit more, so I'm happy to share with you some other pieces of advice. And I will share with you at the end all of the slides, as well as a post I wrote for the expat woman. And that includes all of the 10 tips I'm going to share with you today. So the first thing, which I alluded to earlier, again, be resilient, use your global mindset and or experience if you worked abroad as an asset. So I remember when I was, moving back to Canada, sometimes I would think of my experience abroad as something I wanted to shy away from because it didn't necessarily meet the context exactly or meet the even the job description exactly. But I soon realized that actually this is what makes you stand out from the crowd. And I could tell you, even you might not notice, but English is my second language. And this was something when I was younger that would throw me off when people ask like, oh, where's your accent from or something like that. But you know what, just own it. Like own that you speak multiple languages, own that you lived and worked in multiple countries, because that's what makes you stand out from the majority of people who are applying for these jobs. So again, use this mindset and your global experience as an asset and don't shy away from it. Another thing that I mentioned a little before, I mean, it's great to have conventional education. I have multiple degrees, so I'm not going to be someone who will tell you don't, learn or don't get more schooling. But I also would really recommend that you leverage the unconventional education you may have. So a lot of people's paths to a job are, riddled with different life experiences. So maybe someone went on maternity leave, or maybe someone, did a boot camp in between two jobs, or did another form of experience which is not like a degree. And I would actually say that you should really leverage this education, because this also makes you stand out. So if you took some time to actually do a silent meditation retreat, which I've done, that's something that I actually would highlight once I meet people in person at an interview, and it's not something that I would try to hide. So that's something that I would say, use your life experience and your education as well. The next is to plan your job hunt, and as we've all heard it, probably to set SMART goals. So there's nothing worse, I think, than getting really frustrated because you're applying to a bunch of jobs and you're hearing nothing back, or when you are hearing back, it's like negative news. So I would say the best way to deal with that is to plan your job hunt. Know what success looks like for you and make it a SMART goal. So when you do have those days where you're feeling frustrated or confused, you can say, you know what, actually, this is my measure for what success looks like, the M in SMART, and this is the timely aspect. I told myself I would give myself, 6 months to find this job, so I'm still on track. So just always realize that planning your job hunt is important. And having said that, you should always be ready for life to throw some surprises at you. As for anyone who's been on this earth for 20 plus years, I think we will, and in my case, 30 plus years, and for some of you a lot more than that, we realize that, the life experience can be a roller coaster at times, and sometimes you'll be really close to an offer and something completely drastic will happen, or maybe you're in a great job and then you get laid off. Like, be okay with the unexpected. And I can tell you that because if you name anything crazy, probably it's happened to me in the 12 years I've worked. So just realize that a lot of things are outside of your control, and not to let you hold that back. And last but not least, I'll share a little bit more about this later, but joining a support group can be really helpful. So you can learn a little bit more on my website, which is PIDAAR.com, PIDAR, which means resilient in the Persian language. And again, you'll hear me use that word again and again before Sheryl Sandberg made it famous. And that's because really the key for me is using what your experiences are and your assets as your strengths. So one of the things that was really helpful for me was joining a mastermind, which is a support group, when I was in a career transition. And it was just remote, video conference with a few other women around the world. One was in Asia, another was in Europe, another in Africa, another elsewhere in North America. I have yet to meet any of these women, but years later, I'm still in touch with all of them. So I would really recommend that, you use the support groups that you have, because it can feel challenging at times and it can definitely feel like you're alone, but using these groups will help you to keep each other accountable and to be successful in the long run. So that's a little bit more about the general tips. Now, a little more about job search timeline. And before I get into that, I've been noticing that in the chat, people haven't been putting in questions. So please, if you have any questions, put them into the chat so that we can address them at the end of the webinar together. So again, I mentioned I'm in San Francisco. You might be elsewhere in the world, and that's fine because the job search timeline looks pretty similar, regardless of whether you're applying to a nonprofit or small startup or a large organization. So generally, it starts with what I call hunting season, which is you as the candidate looking for jobs that would be the right fit for you and making those applications. Then there will be some phone interviews, usually with a recruiter, maybe even multiple recruiters, and the hiring manager. And then in-person interviews are usually what follows. So that's also called an on-site, and that's really where you can differentiate yourself and really show what you have to offer. Almost always for a marketer like myself, there is a final assignment, and that just tests that you are beyond just interviewing well, that you actually know the core skills. And last but not least, there's more recently a trial day, which is you working with the team. So realize also that unless you have exactly the experience that the first job that you look at is looking for, and you have the right timing, and everything works out, this is almost always going to be a loop, which means you're not going to get the first job you ever apply to. You're not going to have this job for life. We're living in 2018, and there's a lot of changes, which can be both exciting, but it can also be challenging. So I definitely know what it's like to go through this and, be extended an offer and then be told, oh, actually, we didn't have the budget come through, or something like that. So realize that this will most likely be a loop. So a little bit more about the details. And it's great. Wow, most people are in the Bay Area. I see. Great. Feel free to, again, if you have any questions, put them into the chat as well. So some details, what I mentioned. Do your research. So I can tell you, having been a hiring manager for years, it is really easy, you'd be surprised, to notice when it's a copy and pasted cover letter. And I can tell you this because I have gone through thousands of applications at this point, and I've reviewed them all in some capacity, and I've conducted interviews with hundreds of people, and it becomes pretty apparent to hiring managers like myself when someone hasn't done their research. And I think even more so for recruiters, because that's what they do like day in and day out. So that's something that I would recommend, is that don't just do a spray and pray approach. It can be very tempting to just have the same exact cover letter, same exact resume, but people will feel it. And sometimes people actually have seen, have copy and pasted the wrong company name, which is a complete no-no, and or the wrong title. And like that's a turnoff, and also it kind of disqualifies you from moving forward. So that's why I say do your research during that hunting season. It will make you take some extra time, but it'll be worth it, I promise. So, I trust you all are going to do your research, so then you're going to move on to phone interviews. And that's essentially the recruiter and the hiring manager using this as an initial screen to make sure it's worth their time bringing you in for an on-site. So this is a way that, people have started doing Zoom, people have started using the phone, and it is a bit more challenging because you're not there in person, but you can also use it as leverage for yourself, because in that way you can kind of like do searches in the background if you have a specific question that you're being posed, and you can even search in the background while you're on the phone. So, let's say you ace the phone interviews. Great, good job. You've moved on to the on-site, the in-person interview. This is really your moment to shine and make an impression at the company. So this means that take the extra effort. I'll share with you what that means, and do a presentation if they ask for it. Connect with your interviewers in advance if you have a chance. Almost always you'll be told their names, and it's really easy in this day and age to look people up on LinkedIn, and you don't necessarily have to add them. You can just message them and say, hey, looking forward to meeting you on interview day, or like email them and say the same thing, and always, always, always follow up. Oh my goodness, I don't know how many times I've interviewed people and they've never sent a thank you email. It's a small gesture, but I can tell you that if you do it, it will definitely make an impression, and it'll pay dividends. And if you don't send a thank you email, I mean, it's not like you're 100% guaranteed you won't get that job, but then you're fighting with the mind space of that person and all the other people they've seen on the onsite. So that's what I mean by making an impression. Then, let's say you ace all your on-site interviews. That's great. Usually for people who work in tech, there's a final assignment, and that's essentially evaluating the depth of your skills. So almost always, anytime I've had interviews as a marketer, I have had a final assignment. So I would say take the time to do this and make sure that you do a good job. I mean, don't spend weeks on it. You can always feel free to ask the recruiter and or hiring manager, hey, how long would you anticipate that I should spend on this? And anything that they tell you is going to take longer. So people tend to tell you like, oh, an hour. Don't only spend an hour. Don't spend a week either, but spend a few hours on it. So that's the final assignment. Last but not least, companies are doing this more and more often. It definitely doesn't mean that this is going to happen to you, but there are trial days, which is essentially part of a day where you'll come in and you work with the team that's already there. And that's almost always a paid day or half day. And this is a way for people to find out if you would be a cultural add. And the reason why I don't say cultural fit is because I believe in very diverse and inclusive teams. So this is a good way also for you to know that this is a company you want to work for. So Another similar situation is contract to hire, which tends to happen a lot for, let's say, designers, which is that you're on a contract and then, it may last up to 3 months and then they'll extend you a full-time offer at that stage. So just be aware of the possibilities of that happening. Another thing I want to let you know about this timeline process is it is a mutual decision. So it is a two-way street. Don't just take any offer that you get. Always negotiate. Even if you don't get more in terms of money, you can negotiate in terms of vacation, you can negotiate so many things. And also, don't feel bad about turning down offers. There's like several offers I've turned down, not just for money, but like I realized by the end of the process that this was not the right fit for me, and that's fine. Like it's meant to be a two-way street. It's not meant to be that any offer you get is the right offer and any job you get is the right one. So that's a little bit more about the job timeline. Again, just talking about this is a little exhausting. So having support helps, and I'll mention towards the end of our time together what it would be like to be part of a support network and a support group like a mastermind, because then you'll have the network, you'll have the accountability, you'll receive feedback, and you will also get, more likely the success that it is to land your dream job. So that's a little more about timeline. So here is our 4 pieces of advice that I would really highlight. I mentioned a few of them earlier, and I'll give you an example for each of these in my experience having worked all around the world and in different types of organizations. I can tell you that I've had some challenging experiences, and I'm sure you have had as well. So being resilient is something that I would never underestimate. So being someone who can really bounce back from a negative experience or even like a neutral experience and use it as a learning experience to propel yourself forward. One thing I will say, and all of these pieces of feedback I'm giving you because I've lived through this, but I know they're all easier said than done. So don't take things personally. Again, a lot of the time there are aspects of this process that are outside of your control. Maybe a company is downsizing, or the company might fold altogether. Don't take it personally. If you are applying to a job and you don't get accepted and you get a rejection, a lot of the time you'd be surprised, but it actually doesn't have anything to do with you. You don't know what's going on behind the closed doors, and a lot of the successful companies on paper are actually pretty chaotic inside. And I can tell you that because I've been consulting for a few years and I've been working at companies that on paper are doing amazing. And as a consultant, I've been helping them work through their processes and the chaos that they're going through every day. So that's the first part of being resilient. I mean, take feedback and ask for feedback, but don't take it personally in the sense that don't think that everything has to do with you. So one thing I would say is, for every single person who has ever asked me for feedback during any part of the recruitment process, so after an initial phone screen, after an on-site or an in-person interview, after a trial day, anytime they've asked me for feedback, I've sat down and personally written this feedback email and or had a call with them. I'm not guaranteeing you that every single hiring manager is going to do this, but if you don't ask, 100% chance is that you will not get feedback. So if you do ask, there's infinite more chances that you will get it. Because if you don't, no one's just gonna come out and spend extra time, because I can tell you, as a busy entrepreneur, no one has extra time to spend giving every single person in the recruitment process feedback. But if you ask for it, there's a lot more chances than 0 than you'll get it. Last but not least, again, focus on your strengths and what went well in that process, whether it was a job that didn't work out, whether it was a process that you didn't get through. So that's all what it means to be resilient. That's our first piece of advice. And I can tell you my real life example. So I was working at the Canadian Embassy in Tokyo, Japan, right when the 2008 financial crisis happened, and I'm sure regardless of where you were living at the time that you felt it in some way. So the entire financial market crashed. in a way that hadn't been seen for like 100 years. And even governments were having issues with keeping their contract employees around. So none of us employees who were on contract got a renewal. And initially I took that personally because I was like, I worked really hard, I did really well. And it was just, the Canadian Embassy was not in the position, like almost all organizations, to keep their entire workforce around. So of course the people who are going to go first are the ones who are on contract, right? So that's something that I would share with you, that I've lived through this. It really hurt, but being resilient, I can tell you that experience helped me. And it's 10 years later, and I look back on that with only positive insight, because it really did help in every other experience I've had. So that's my experience for you for the first point. The next is to always be learning. So one of my top 5 values is learning, and I can tell you that it's a lifelong process for me. For some people, you know, they don't necessarily want to do more on the job training or continue learning, but if you do, it will help differentiate you in the modern world where a lot of jobs get hundreds of applications. So again, be curious and learn. So, you know, I have been told multiple times, wow, Lida, you seem to know so many great events, and you seem to know like everyone in San Francisco. And I can assure you I don't, but it seems that way to people, and they think it was like an overnight thing. I've lived here for almost 4 years, and I have been out at events. I have, you know, spoken at them. I have attended. I have been learning in multiple ways, and it's not an overnight thing. And it is something that I committed to lifelong learning. So regardless of where I go, I can tell you I will get into the community and learn about which events to attend, how I can continue my learning. And it's not just for networking, but also to gain the skills to keep me always in the top marketers or any top expert in your field. So that's what I mean by keep your finger on the pulse. Another thing that I would recommend is find inspiration from your peers. So I have subscribed to the newsletters of fellow marketers. I follow some people's work who are designers, and that just helps me on, you know, tough days where I'm like, oh wow, this is possible, and it helps motivate me. And that's part of learning as well. Another thing, when you learn and you continue to learn different things and read and attend workshops and so on, is you'll create connections, which leads to innovation. So all of you here on this call, you are on this path. You joined this webinar where most other people, you know, are just making their job hunt a more passive process. So I commend you. You're already on the learning track. So I would advise you to keep doing this and keep learning, because it leads to more open doors, and you'd be surprised where you'll get the next opportunity. So my real life experience in this case is working at a very traditional Swiss company that's in the Fortune 1000. You know, it's in construction management. It's one of the top leaders globally. It's number 2 out of all the other companies. It was challenging, but I learned. And, you know, I was the one who was asking to go for field trips and learn. And they were like, wait, why do you want to do this? Also, let me mention, it was 5% women. So you can do the math, 95% male dominated. I'm not saying it's easy, but I can also tell you I was the first person who went to an on-site training where it was only engineers, electrical engineers, and I, you know, though I have a science background, I was in a marketing function. I didn't need to be there, but I wanted to know how the product worked and how I could sell it better. So that's something where I was curious, I learned, and then they put me in charge of being a mentor of a career development program where I was definitely the youngest mentor of all of the people there, and I was probably younger than most of the mentees. That's just to tell you that people will recognize when you are standing out and you are curious and you are learning and you're putting yourself out there. So that's what I would recommend as another piece of advice. Another thing, building relationships. I cannot emphasize this enough. This is a relationships business. Back to our dating analogy. You know, if you go on a first date with someone, you would really hope that they are not going to propose to you and want you to commit to marriage. And just similar to that, anytime you meet a recruiter and or hiring manager, you could be direct, but you shouldn't expect them to, sign you an offer letter on the spot. So you have to build these relationships. And the best time actually to network is right when you get a new job, because that's when you're not needing to ask for a job. But I can assure you that even if you are looking for a job, that's the second best time to be networking, because you could be direct, but you don't have to expect that you will get a job just from reaching out to someone on LinkedIn once. So it is a relationships business, so communication is key. And putting yourself in someone else's shoes is also very important. Empathizing with the fact that recruiters get hundreds, if not thousands, of applications that they have to go through in a given month is something that most job seekers don't do, but realize that they also have a tricky job. I've never been a recruiter, but I have worked with many recruiters in the past, and I can tell you that they would love if people could be a little more empathetic towards their situation. I've been a hiring manager, and I can also tell you that for the people who succeeded, they're the ones who built relationships with me, and it wasn't all about give me, give me, give me. It was also that they were adding value to the conversation, even if it was just, hey, let me take you out for a coffee or a tea and share with you my experience, and you can do the same. Another thing is, while I say that, also know how to sell yourself and your experience. So I always try to help people when I meet them, and I always ask, how can I help you? And people tend to ask, oh, okay, so can you refer me to someone that is hiring? And I can tell you, I have over 5,000 LinkedIn connections. I have a good memory, but it's not good enough to sift through in my brain, in the moment, over 5,000 people I'm connected to on LinkedIn to find one who would be the right fit for you. So as a job seeker, you should be the one who is doing the homework in order to sell yourself and your experience. So you could tell me, hey, I'm a web developer and I've just finished this boot camp and I'm ready to go. I'm about to start applying to jobs. What I would really love is introductions to directors of engineering at Series B level funded health tech companies with offices in downtown San Francisco. That would be really great. I mean, that's really great. The ultimate best thing you could ask me is, Lida, I would like an intro to this specific person, and then do that. I could tell you from my side, anytime I want to ask someone for an intro, regardless of whether they're more senior or junior than me, I will write them an email that's essentially, all they have to do is forward that email. So essentially with one click, I've done their job for them. So it's like, hi, I'm Lida. This is what I'm looking for in connecting with this person. And thank you, so on. It's a few lines long, but those intros get sent a lot more quickly because I am literally asking the person to forward this email to their introduction, and I'm not asking them to think in their brain which of the 5,000 connections they have will get them a job. So that's what I mean by building relationships. And I can tell you that I learned this advice the hard way because, 10 years ago, I was applying to jobs, just applying to hundreds of Government of Canada jobs. And it's very challenging and very competitive to get into the federal government. But I was just doing it as if, it was a machine and that I was just sending applications through. Of course, I got several jobs and offers, and I took a couple of them. But I can tell you it would have been infinitely easier for me had I built relationships and had gone through, an internship program, or gone through and found a hiring manager to connect to. So it's really important to learn that this is a relationships business. And even though one of your many applications will stick at some point, it will be a lot easier for you if you put in the time and effort in order to make this a personalized process. And I can tell you, I learned from that experience, and I landed a few jobs in the last 12 years, literally 100% from networking. So one of them was, I was at a networking event in Switzerland. I was still doing business school. I was not in the market for a job, and I happened to speak to the CEO of a startup. I didn't even know who he was. I was just being myself. He was just being himself. We resonated, and we thought, okay, this person's great. And then he literally asked, are you good at writing reports in English? And I was like, yes. And so I wrote their first corporate social responsibility report, and that became my MBA internship. But I can tell you, had I been approaching that conversation from a give me standpoint, it would not have happened. But I was just there, trying to be friendly, and he was the same, and that was how I landed a job without even applying. I can tell you, people have asked me for an intro to that company, and that company, South Pole, which does carbon trading, gets hundreds of job applications for one job. So if you can help shortcut your way to get that job, that would be great, and I would love that for all of you. So that's what I mean by building relationships. Next and last, because I want to spend some time in Q&A, knowing your impact. And this is something that a lot of people seem to have trouble with. So I will give you an example and also a way that you could get support from beyond this webinar. So learn the key value of the business and know the relevant key performance indicators. And I can tell you why this is important, because when I first came to San Francisco, I was applying to jobs. I got a couple offers. I ended up working at Omada Health, running a marketing team. And I can tell you, I met literally a dozen people at that company. And one of them was the COO, who I never worked with directly, because she's in the C-suite. But she had an interview with me, which was one of the most challenging I've ever had. She didn't smile at all during the whole time. And she was just grilling me about different ways I could contribute value to the company. I'm not saying that this is something that I would recommend as an interviewer, but realize that sometimes this happens. And if you don't do well on that interview, which means if you don't know what your job would actually be at that company, then you're probably not going to get that job. Because I can tell you, out of the dozen people I met, she had the biggest say, in the sense that if she said no, probably it meant that I wouldn't get hired. So that's what I mean by knowing your impact, which leads to opportunities. Last but not least, I wanted to again share the website, which is at the bottom of all the slides, for the support group, which is a mastermind. So again, I've had a really great experience, one of the best in my career transition a few years ago, with a support group. And it was all women, it was remote, and I can't recommend it enough. So since then, I've done an in-person mastermind that I've hosted as the facilitator, and it's gone really well, which is why I am extending this offer to you, which is the next kickoff is July 2nd. So learn more and sign up for the waitlist if you want to hear more about it at Pydar.com. So that's the last opportunity to work with me on a group basis. Otherwise, it will be one-on-one, which I also welcome. And this mastermind will be the feedback that I will use to launch a full-time course in the fall, which I will let you know about. But I can tell you the price for that course is going to be a lot more expensive. So it will be probably 10x what the mastermind costs. So I always try to work with anybody who has any financial issues, so feel free to reach out to me. So without further ado, I will go through the Q&A, and also I'm doing another webinar on a very different topic next week on Wednesday. So if you want to join a really mindful webinar, feel free to sign up on this link. So I'm going to just go through all your questions, which I'm going to do from the first ones that were received. So, all right. Katharina, and please bear with me as I will have to read this and then read it out loud to you and then answer. So it's going to take a little bit of time. Katharina's asking how to adopt to the local culture when applying. I noticed that Americans are presenting themselves very confidently in interviews and CVs. Coming from Germany, this doesn't feel naturally to me, and I realize that my CV is not as competitive as I'm not confident in starting, for example, skills like Photoshop. Okay. Katharina, thank you so much for that question. I can tell you I'm Canadian by citizenship. We Canadians are known for being very humble and saying sorry a lot. And that was definitely something that moving to San Francisco, or regardless of where you are, maybe in the US, that's something that I noticed. And I had to kind of realize that you have to sell yourself, which is why I mentioned that earlier in the presentation. Selling yourself doesn't mean you are being inauthentic. Always be truthful, but realize that if you're being modest and you're not taking credit when you aced a program or you did really well and it was your effort, then that's doing you a disservice. So if you are not great at Photoshop, then you don't have to highlight that. You could highlight, I'm sure, the tens of other strengths that you have. But when it does come time to it, you do have to highlight your strengths. So that's something I would say. Great. Okay, so Jean-Pierre asks, would you want to do a thank you email after phone interview or on-site interview? I would say definitely. After phone interview is up to you. I think it's very much personal preference. An on-site interview, imagine every single person's salary and it's being spent on meeting with any candidate. So what I mean is on-site interviews are very, very pricey to the company, which means that they already believe in you as a candidate, and that's why they brought you in. Because they brought you in, you should be grateful for the opportunity and stand out by sending a thank you email. And that's something that I would do, to all the interviewers. You could do it in a batch email. It literally can take 5 minutes of your time, but if you don't send it, then you won't stay top of mind. Okay. Dr. Cardenas asks, how long after meeting do you recommend sending the thank you email? I usually do it the next day, and there's no science about this. As someone with a science degree, I wish there was, but there isn't. I mean, if you wait like a week or two, it's better than not sending it at all. But at that point, people have very short attention spans. So it's not gonna be as helpful as if you send it in the same week that you saw somebody for an on-site interview. Okay, someone asks, Amrita asks, how to prepare for corridor conversations with Americans. This is awesome. The water cooler conversations. I don't follow music or NFL or Captain America or Seinfeld, so it's hard to mingle and have casual conversations. How did you work to be accepted? Okay, so I can give you an example. So World Cup is on, right? I don't know if you guys are big football fans. I am a little bit. I haven't been watching any of the games, but I have to always correct Americans that football is soccer, the real football is soccer, and American football isn't the real one. And in the sense that the one match from Real Madrid and Barcelona draws 500 million viewers, and that's more than all of Super Bowl. So it doesn't mean that you need to change your culture or start watching American football or NFL or Seinfeld to fit in. What it means is, if you find, oh wow, this person seems to also be interested in soccer, let's talk about that. Or something, there's always things that people of all cultures are interested in. Maybe it's dancing, maybe it's listening to some, podcasts. Always find a way to resonate with your colleagues, and don't feel like you need to change your personality. Because if you don't like American football, you don't have to. So I'm on board with you on that one. Alex asks, just curious if the rest of the presentation is going to focus on global experience. To add some more specificity, how do you tailor the resume and LinkedIn profile to SEO, to global and international positions? What are some of the position keywords to use in searching for opportunities, and how to use one's global experience as an asset? Hopefully, the last 50 minutes has helped answer this question. I will let you know that hopefully my SEO work has helped, and I always test it, because anytime I'm doing a project, for example, Pydar.com, it always ranks in the first 1 or 2 links on Google. So having said that, even if you have success, SEO takes time. So, and SEO, for those who aren't marketers or don't know, is search engine optimization, which means how quickly you'll be found on Google or other search engines. So what's really helpful, if on your LinkedIn, if you connect with me at this point, I'm happy to connect with you, and I'll bring up my information here. And also for those who want the slides, it's pydar.com/pound-updates. Just put your email and name in there, and I'll send you all the slides, as well as the post I did with the 10 pieces of advice. And you can also connect with me on Twitter. So I will connect with all of you. Happy to do that. So back to the question. On LinkedIn, you'll notice if you go on my profile, I have different taglines. So it's like managing director / diversity and mindfulness speaker / tech founder. So that tagline helps for SEO. And if you want to find a role in EMEA or in global marketing, that's where you would put it, as well as within your profile. Another thing that's really helpful is on LinkedIn, it's a new feature I've been told. You can go on there and look for a feature that says open to recruiters, and that just means that recruiters can find your profile and offer you positions. So that's what it means to optimize your profile on LinkedIn and Twitter. Make sure that, whatever platform you're on, it doesn't have to be these two, that it's synced so that if people search your name, like if people search Lina Tawhidi, they'll find the same thing everywhere. And that's how you help with SEO. Great. Okay, what advice do you have for people like me who are looking for their first professional experience abroad? Alice. So I'm gonna assume you're still junior in your career, and then I'll also give you an answer for otherwise. Over 10 years ago, I did my first professional experience abroad. And if you speak English, which I assume you do, and even though it's my second language, I was an English teacher as my first professional experience abroad. And that is one of the easier jobs to get, just because there's so much demand for it. There's a website I would recommend. I have not used it myself. It's flexjobs.com, and that has a bunch of remote opportunities. And that's something that, might be different, where in the sense you are working remotely. But I would say if you're junior, look for something like English teaching, and on that website there's a lot of other opportunities as well. If you're more senior, you can always look into larger companies and see where your experience fits into that larger company, as they have a lot of subsidiaries. So for example, the headquarters of the Swiss company I was working at, Schindler, has 100 subsidiaries around the world. So, it was relatively easy to find a position where I could fit in. So that's what I would say. So I'm going through these because I want to make sure I get to everyone's question, which is why I'm speaking fast. So I hope you can all hear and connect with everything I'm saying. And again, if you can't, you can always connect with me on LinkedIn and or Twitter. You can also, if you want to sign up to learn more about the next support group, the next mastermind group, go to pidaar.com, and put your email. If you want the slides and the post, go to pidaari.com/updates. So there are different websites. Just mentioning that. Amanda asks, it would be really interesting to hear about previous international work experience as an asset when interviewing. What main talking points, benefits do you see? Okay. So again, I don't know anyone's experience here, so I have to be generic in my advice, and then sometimes I can give you personal advice from my experience. So whenever I was moving countries, and a lot of the reason why I have so many countries on my profile, or like in my in my LinkedIn, it's not, I didn't do it the smart way actually. The smartest way is probably find a big company that has many subsidiaries and just do it like a rotation or a tour in different ones. I literally had to interview every single time for a new job in a new country, do the whole visa process. Like none of this was handed to me. So I can tell you that using the international work experience is something that almost none of the other candidates will have. So I can tell you when I was applying to my job in Japan, like they needed people who spoke English, especially at the Canadian Embassy. So, and I also speak French. So it's like, that's helpful for them. When I wanted to move back to Canada, then I used that experience in Japan to say, hey, federal government of Canada, which is where I ended up, I worked at the Canadian Embassy in Tokyo, and I had this great experience. And this is what I can bring to you that the other hundreds of people who are applying to this job can't. And I pointed to specifics from my experience in Japan. Same when I moved from Australia elsewhere. So always use it as an asset, as in this is the experience I had working with, whether it's like different demographics, different languages, different contexts, maybe from private to public sector, and use that as an asset. So hopefully that helps. Wow, there's so many questions. All right. Next, Geneviève again. I see you here. Great. So besides networking, I have to keep scrolling up. Okay. All right, here we are. Okay. Having a referral and personalized resumes, it seems like there's a black hole with the application system. How do we stand out and what to keep in mind for different application platforms? And then a bunch of other questions. So I'll address one at a time. ATS, which is the automated tracking system, that's when you use the keywords, and that's what I mentioned to you with the search engine optimization, also works online. Use the keywords that make sense. So if you are a programmer, use all the languages you know. For marketing, I use all the things that are relevant keywords for that, and that's how I make sure that I get through the application system. Thank you all. Almost everyone has stuck around to the end, so I really appreciate this. Another question, benefits of an MBA. How useful did your higher education become with your work experience? So again, I had a technical science degree, and yet I fell into marketing in the sense that I've worked in marketing my whole career, but I wanted to make sure that I also was learning the tools of the trade, which is why I did business school. So for me, it was helpful because I was moving from a technical degree to one that was not, was more in the marketing and business career. So if you're not doing that, and you don't see the reason why you should spend a lot of money on a business degree, I wouldn't recommend it. But otherwise, you should feel that it's a personal decision. There's no one who's going to tell you the right answer for you. You should reflect on it and see if it's worth the time and money. Someone else asked, I'm interested in working with a nonprofit company abroad instead of doing a fellowship, specifically in Eastern African countries. Do you have any tidbits that might be different in terms of resume formats for different countries? Okay, so I have worked in Eastern Africa in Malawi. I've worked in Benin as well, but that's like Western Africa. So I can tell you it's pretty much the same. One thing is that people sometimes put their photos on resumes in most other countries aside from the Anglo-Saxon world, so not in England, not in Canada, not in the US. So you can feel free to put your picture, just because people tend to leverage resumes versus just LinkedIn. So that's one thing that's different. Yaneth also asked, picture or no picture on your resume. If you live in North America, no picture on a resume, because it's something that has to do with equal opportunity. But to be honest, people still go on LinkedIn and find out, what you look like. So yeah, it's a cultural difference. And last but not least, Lucy asks, what's your advice on breaking into the tech or startup world without a tech background? Yeah, so I have a semi-tech background in the sense that I have a science degree, but I would recommend that you either think about doing a boot camp if it makes sense for you, or you think about connecting with people, and that's what I mentioned, and showing how your non-tech background would help. So I am a very punctual person, so I have answered all the questions, and it's 1 o'clock, or depending where you are, 1 hour since we started. So I want to make sure that I'm being mindful of everybody's time. I'm happy to stick around for any more questions, but I wanted to thank you all for spending the full hour with me. Almost everyone's still here, which is amazing. Feel free again to add me on LinkedIn, connect with me on Twitter as well. Both of those platforms are good. Those are the two that I engage with. If you want the slides, go to the link paydarii.com/pound-updates. I'll send those to you today. And if you're interested at all in the support group, which is the mastermind, put your email and your name in paydarii.com. Thank you so much, everybody, and it's been great chatting with you.
Thank you, Lida, so much for making the time to do this fabulous webinar, and thank you to everyone who joined in and who stayed on to speak with us. So hope to see you soon, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.